panel discussion. And I'm very happy that, in the morning people were talking about partnerships. Do we work in silos? And I was telling them the work we have done with IIDS and other think tanks and other agencies. And great to have Biswas Gauchan, Executive Director at Institute for Integrated Development Studies, IIDS, and Vishnu Adhikari, Governance Director at the Asia Foundation, who has some not only deep experiences within think tanks, but someone who looks at think tanks in a manner of critic, as well as how can think tanks transform. And then the conversation would be led by Apeksha Shah, Senior Fellow and Technical Lead for Nepal and the World at the Nepal Economic Forum, and someone who has been really energizing us at Nepal Economic Forum to think around how do we build more collaborations, how do we move on becoming think tanks, how do we sort of recalibrate ourselves as an institution, and also personally, that's the journey she is in. So over to you, Apeksha. You have 45 minutes, including Q&A, and there would be a timer at the bottom, so yeah, that will help you. Over to you.
Right. Thank you, Sujeev. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Apeksha Shah, and as Sujeev mentioned, I am currently a senior fellow at Nepal Economic Forum and the technical lead for its incubation program, Nepal and the World. I'll be moderating the session today on the role of think tanks in policy discourse. And the purpose of the discussion is to reflect on the space of think tanks in Nepal and what the future might hold for such institutions. While NEF has been successful in generating discourses on pertinent issues relating to Nepal's economy for almost 14 years now, as the organization grows in the coming days, it is important to reflect on how NEF and other think tanks can generate better policy advice, enabling both policymakers and public at large to make informed decisions. So, and the publication of the 50th issue of NEFport is also a significant milestone for NEF, and congratulations are in order for the team. NEFport was the first initiative I was involved with in NEF, and I consider it to be one of the most significant contributions. So without taking more time, I was thinking maybe we can start with introductions first. We've already, we have very distinguished panelists here today, Dr. Gauchan from IIDS and Mr. Vishnu. So maybe we could just start with brief introductions. What do you guys do? And then maybe we can start with the discussion. And like we had decided, right? So it's 30 minutes discussion, 15 minutes Q&A, and please feel free to converse. Let's not make it like a Q&A, like just me asking questions and you answering. So yeah. So maybe we can start with you, Vishnuji.
Thank you, Apeksha. It's really a great honor to be here and have this opportunity to reflect myself and also with the audience here. So just yesterday when we were having this conversation, in preparation of this conversation, I was just recollecting, I started my journey back in late 90s, as a researcher at the Center for Nepal and Asian Studies at Tribhuvan University. Since then, I moved on to working especially with the bilateral donors here in Nepal, with USAID, with DFID, then DFID, and now currently I'm with the Asia Foundation. And in these nearly 20 years of my work experience in these bilateral agencies and other partners, most often from those organizations, as well as on the individual basis, I had the opportunity to work with a lot of civil society and think tanks and academic institutions. So both to some extent helping emerge and inculcate new civil society as well as advocacy organizations, as well as think tanks, and also be accompanying in that journey of what they were intent to produce and how they were intent to influence and inform both the citizen as well as the policy makers. So let me stop here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gauchan.
First of all, thank you very much for having me today in this very important session. My name is Biswas Gauchan. I'm the Executive Director in IIDS. Before joining IIDS, I used to be in different organizations. In my last 30 years of career. I have known different hats. I used to be very much part of private sector as well at a certain point in my time. But I started from working in UNDP for almost 10 years, both in Nepal and then in Africa, and then I went on to join a commercial bank in South Sudan as a chief executive officer. So having different perspective and different, roles of different sectors, I think I could be an important voice in shaping policy discourse in the country, and that's what I have been doing since I joined IIDS from 2020, early 2020. And the journey of IIDS is, I think, something that many of you can relate to if you are working in development sector for last several years. And IIDS has been, one of the champions of bringing up new ideas to the fore, especially on the policy domain. And that's, I think, the institution like IIDS should be doing. And in this course, what we are trying to do is bring new ideas and also work with different partners. And because Nepal is a country which is so much dependent on donors for all our development works, so we have to partner. And what I would like to, say at the beginning is that, we have great ideas, but we don't have financial resources. And you have financial resources, we have ideas. Let's work together. And in this process, I think there are lots of actors and the stakeholders who can be part of this process. And the most important is how the bureaucracy or the policymakers, consider us. They have to be very positive, and if they are willing to hear us, and then everything that we do is research-based, data-driven. So we also generate our own data, evidences, and we also work on the data that's available in the public domain. So based on data, we'd like to engage with different stakeholders to influence policy that is very important for the country. And we know what are the low-hanging fruits, what are the medium-term challenges, what are the long-term challenges for the country, especially at times when we are facing this economic challenges since last 2 years after COVID. At these times, I think we really have to work together, and private sector has to be more responsible. I think probably gone were the days where we can be complacent in our approach. I think in these trying times, all of us have to come together and work together. Yeah,
thank you so much, Dr. Gauchan. Right, so I think we can sort of contextualize the think tank space, right? So, Bishnuji, given your long-term experience in the field, maybe you could briefly explain the historical legacy behind think tanks in Nepal and how influential have they been in regards to policy making in the country?
Thank you for this great question. But at the outset, I would just like to make a disclaimer. I've been only a distant observer, so the perspective that I would be giving would be far less than the accurate. And just looking at the audience, I'm feeling honestly a bit apprehensive. So let me make an attempt as an observer. I think even before 1990s, where we noted a significant opening in the space for the civil society and the voice for the civic activist, and also emergence of the independent think tank or think tank outside of the state purview, there appears to be, in my observation, a very clear understanding or the value of the think tanks as party or as an agency to help shape the policy. So I would say, starting from the establishment of our first university, way back in late 50s up until 90s, within the university, if we could consider that as the first offshoot of think tank, and up until 1990, the universities were allowed to have their own entities, amongst others, doing research, analytics, and supporting on policy. They also very actively try to play a role of think tanks. And since then, maybe if we could make the other observation since 1990, in my observation, there is desire or there is acknowledgement on the part of government or state that the think tank are essential, and we could note time after time various governments or various leaders have continued to help establish these think tanks, and that kept continuing. So maybe the most recent example could be the Niti Aayog that we call in Nepali. So there seems to be very clear intent and understanding in terms of the government or the state why the think tanks are necessary. Similarly, on the civil society, or if I could put that on those type of civil society who were supported or funded by other external partners, donors, and the civil society, they emerge themselves as to be think tank. I think it would be fair to give credit to the state that there was sufficient enough legal framework or the space for individuals and for organizations and civic actors and civil society to form themselves as think tank and try to serve their purpose, which is research, analysis, and based on those research, analysis, evidence, inform citizen as well as the government or whoever the audience is. So there is another big question perhaps is whether this journey of both state government funded think tanks and the donor or the externally funded think tanks have been able to prove their relevance. How effective have they been? And is there a scope? Are they going to be relevant for future? I think there are lots of questions. If I may just mention one observation is there is a scope for think tanks, there is need for think tanks, and their relevance and effectiveness would be dependent on how effectively the think tank themselves are able to generate evidence, knowledge, and how timely they are able to communicate the policy recommendations or their findings or evidence. In other words, in my very limited observations where through the Asia Foundation for the last 4 or 5 years, where we have tried to see whether some of those knowledge, evidence generated by the think tanks or the analytics or the civil society could be applied at the subnational level. Our very limited observation indicates that if they are accompanied by the citizen engagement, or if they are relatable and applicable and understandable, very easily accessible to the public, to the citizen, that creates enough of appetite on the public officials or sometimes compulsion to accept those recommendations and turn them into policy implementation. But those evidences are, I don't think we can generalize yet. So let me pause here. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Right. So I think coming to you, Dr. Galchan again, I think you spoke about the funding, and I think that's a very important factor any organization, let alone think tanks. I think so. I mean, if you could just speak a little bit about that, like how can we handle, like what are the different financial modalities that think tanks can go into? Like I think government-backed think tanks obviously have some source of secure funding, I might assume, but for non-governmental organizations. So what can be different kinds of financing modalities that are sustainable? Maybe encouraging like philanthropic initiatives or maybe going for profit. Like what could be, like I think that would be something to think about.
Yeah. IIDs is a not-for-profit organization, which means that we are non-business entity. So if something happens to the IIDs and it doesn't, remain anymore, then the whole property or everything that is with IIDs is transferred to the government. So in that sense, we are NGO, and most of the NGOs in Nepal are working in a similar modality, and we are called NGO, and we need to transition from being an NGO, typical NGO, to a real thing, and that's what we are trying our best to do. And for that, I think the most challenging part among many other challenges that we have is the funding. As I said earlier, because our country's development context is entirely driven by donors, and it's, if you take the last 5 decades of ODA that's coming into Nepal, and 25% of our entire budget is funded by foreign assistance, and that has gone down to 13% now in the last 5 years average. But if you take the capital expenditure, still 70% of capital expenditure is funded by donors. So in that context, we can relate how important is the external assistance that we are getting. So and in that context, we are there, IIDs, as not really, or it applies to every other NGOs that in Nepal is operating, because what we have been doing so far is actually engaging ourselves within that ideas of donors, because they have certain ideas, they have certain projects, and we are there just to do research on their behalf and then help them come up with certain evidence to influence policy. And that's exactly what we have been doing. And so I think that's something that we need to change, and we need to challenge that it's not going to work. Being a domestic institution which has so much of local knowledge, I believe that for 90% of the problems, we have a local solutions. And who are there to provide this local solution? It is the think tanks, local think tanks. And that's why I'm emphasizing that the importance of working together with the donors. But I think let the donors also listen to ideas, because we know the priorities of the country. For example, IIDs, we went through certain introspection kind of exercise a few months back, and we have come up with certain ideas and initiatives. And right now, we have 36 ideas and a dozen initiatives, which can really influence the policy making in Nepal. Those are the priorities for the country. But the problem is that we don't have any fund to really do a thorough research and come up with certain policy recommendations. And that's where is the biggest challenge that we are facing. And IIDs being a very resourceful institution, I'll just give you an example. In early 2000, we could not pay our staff for 9 months, and IIDs happens to be one of the very old NGO in Nepal, I think probably the second. And we survived. And there was terrible time that we faced because of no projects coming from the donors. And we went through that experience, and it was terrible, despite having a very good endowment, and we are one of the lucky, very fortunate NGOs in Nepal who has received very substantial endowment from donors. Now, but complaints aside, I think we have to be very innovative in our approach also in terms of raising fund, and we are trying our best. Okay, we are trying different modalities, different approach to generate funds, so that at least we become financially independent, so that we can pursue our own, initiatives and our own goals to basically to work as a think tank, so that we can influence the policy making in the country.
Thank you so much. I think I would just like to build on what both of you just have mentioned, right? So you spoke about how think tanks can help donors, like more than a donor-driven approach. Maybe think tanks can approach donors based on their needs and their requirement. And I think before you mentioned about the timely intervention, which is so crucial because for think tanks, I think there's always a debate about what kind of work a think tank does. Is it going to be more like research-oriented, or is it going to be more policy-oriented, which is more easy to understand for policymakers, which is just, which has more policy impact. But the time factor is so important, right? Because if a think tank is working on a certain issue, and if an event happens or a certain situation happens, which the think tanks will have a better idea about in the domestic context, then it becomes effective. Then I think we can see the impact, or you guys will be ready to take that or make an impact that of influencing the business that we're into. So moving forward, what can be done to increase the relevance of think tanks? So, so I think the output can be seen. I think we discussed this briefly also. It's a difficult question, but yeah, so most think tanks' output can be seen, but the impact, right? Because what are we trying to, we're not lobbying, but we are trying to influence policy making. So what do you think we can do moving forward that could make think tanks and the work they do more relevant and more like having much more impact than we're having right now? And one of you, right? Yeah, sure.
I can start. I'm very happy the kind of influence that we made in last 2 years, especially during COVID, and after that, some of the big ideas that we have thrown out to the larger audience and public has been very instrumental, actually. To influence the perception and shaping the ideas, and there are a few things. Lots of things have been done by myself, in my individual capacity, but I can relate that with the institution that I am associated with, and eventually, what we'd like to do is take this personal initiative and institutionalize it within the IADS framework. So because of the media also, the role of media has been very important. You take the example of fiscal policy and monetary policy, there's so much of talk, so much of interest. Before COVID, I think probably except for banking community and those business community, no one was very much interested to know or hear. But now you can see so much interest. It is because of the trying times that we are right now, and some of the discourse that we have initiated. And that has really helped also to shape the mindset of the Ministry of Finance. We all know the terrible time the central bank is having in relation to the Ministry of Finance. Lots of things happening. But despite that, first time ever actually, we had this very tight monetary policy. I think in the entire history of our monetary policy, this is the first time where we had this very tight monetary policy. In the normal circumstances, and especially at times when the central bank and Ministry of Finance were at the loggerheads, this kind of policy, monetary policy, was not possible. But because of the discourse that's going on, there's lots of, what you call discussions going on, and media is taking up that leading role, and that has really helped with the kind of policy that this is just an example that I am giving.
If I may very briefly compliment to your observation. Again, let me go back to the relevance and also maybe respond very briefly. But I'm not trying to defend, but again, sharing my observation, and I might not be representing the entire donor community or how they operate and how they function. But my pure observation in terms of the supporting the think tanks in their purpose, often the donors are function within their own compulsion. There are limitations, there is no doubt about it. However, with respect to the intent in terms of informing themselves, and therefore their choices and decisions are responsive to the need, I think there is very clear intent. We don't need to be worried, or we don't need to be that doubtful in terms of the intent. I think the question is about how. And similarly, if we look at the, going back to the initial questions about, let's for a minute keep aside the donor-dependent think tanks or knowledge generation or data evidence generation. If we are able to, as think tanks, prove ourselves more relevant, I think there is still enough of resources. So where that resource is being spent and how that priorities are made, I think is the question. So at the moment, to my understanding, there are at least 30 or more institutions, state-funded institutions, whose one of the key purposes is to provide the same output as the independent think tank. And the people that we have within these institutions, so for example, the example you gave, you reminded, our Institute of Foreign Affairs. For the expert, for the personnel working in those organizations, I think we also should reflect how relevant our work has been to the public and to the government. And going back to the same question is, how have we been able to communicate those products that the think tank produces? If we're not able to do that, I think this question is bound to come back. And it's the same thing with the publicly or more autonomous independent think tank. In my own observation, that very often I don't see the extent of challenge with ideas, with that critical approach to the donors, to the development partners themselves. Here is this my idea, this is what we intend to do, and the purpose is so and so forth, and this is how it is going to be relevant. You like it or not, whether it falls into your scope or not. Instead, very often I think we're quite guided by, okay, what is your priorities, what you intend to do, where you intend to invest, why do you want it to be partnered with the think tank. So I think that relations and that perspective could be revisited, and gradually we could move from this cycle of the development partners or the donors. Again, I'm not defending the position, but how many times have we honestly tried that and also prove ourselves accompanying both the policy process as well as communicating with the citizens. So Just to give you, again, a very observational perspective, for example, the last 50 years, we have been all the time reading and seeing this narrative that rural road or road to the Himalayan or the mountains are meant to bring economy back to the communities and also deter migration. I think that's the predominant narrative that we have read, we have heard, and time and again, that's the narrative, I think, is influencing the funding allocation, the overall allocation of our government. However, I think our data suggest the road to the remote mountains is neither taking economy or neither bringing economy to the rural areas, nor it is deterring migration from the north to the south. Have we generated enough evidence? Have we generated enough knowledge? Have we really accompanied the whole policy cycle, both on the policy makers as well as the citizens? So I think it might be a time for the think tanks ourselves to reflect that unless we look at it more holistically and have our ways of engaging with various actors in between, the only, one of the intent that the think tanks, in my observation, say is, okay, here is the knowledge, here is the data, now you go and with the assumption that's going to bring changes. Whereas accompanying throughout that process with the policymaker, with the citizen, and when those key decisions making opportunities arise. So maybe accompanying, like Vishwasi, you just suggesting, accompanying, partnering more with the other actors. There are other actors as well in this whole cycle to prove relevance of the think tank, or not prove they are relevant, but to produce more evidence and produce more compelling cases how the think tanks work could be more effective.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you have said. I think the key onus is upon ourselves to prove and to convince the donor community that yes, we have great ideas, and if we, both of us, think about the development of the country or Nepal, then why can't we work together? We have great ideas and we have resources. Let's work together. I think that's the kind of new partnership that we look forward to. And in this new equation, what I would like to say is that I think donor-recipient kind of, that has to change. We are equal partners, one with great ideas and another with the financial resources. And then I think if we work together with this intent, with this change mindset, I think then the work of think tank will be very effective in shaping the policies.
Right. Thank you so much. I think we're running out of time. So I was looking at the clock because I know Sujeev is gonna think me why didn't you take care of the time? So I think we should go for the question and answers now because we just have 13 minutes left in the clock. So if there's so many hands, right? Okay. So Samriddhi, I think I leave it up to you to get the questions.
Hi, thank you very much. It's been really interesting. So I started my career working in a think tank in the UK, and then I moved on to a foundation to fund think tanks and managed a grant to fund think tanks. So I'm acutely aware of some of the challenges you've mentioned. But what I find interesting, as someone who works for the British Embassy here and managing development projects here, is that you haven't talked much about your influence on Nepali society and the Nepali government. You've talked a lot about your influence on donors and development partners and perhaps some of the challenges around that. So I'd love to hear a bit more about your ambitions for actually influencing government policy, either directly or through communities here.
So maybe very briefly, you are absolutely right. And from the foundation, at the moment we're accompanying or partnering with a few think tanks or what we call policy partners or evidence partners. As I was trying to explain earlier, there are enough of evidence, but it takes time. I think very often on the donor side or the development partner side, we have this compulsion to produce evidence within a time span. It doesn't happen. And I think that is what the challenge is for the think tank partners to help explain the donors or the funder. So just to give you a very concrete example, from the foundation, the last 5 years, we are partnering with various local governments across 7 provinces. And in that process, we partnered with civil society to produce data and evidence that the municipality themselves were desperately looking. So what we did in that exercise was we helped the municipalities to generate data as well as collect the data and give a picture of what a new municipality would look like, what we call municipal profile. So it's a comprehensive data of the new configuration that we got after the restructuring of the local government. Because that's what the municipalities were looking. And we saw that as an opportunity. Okay, these new leaders have a reason why they're asking this data, because they in the first instance, I think many of them didn't know what a new municipality for them would look like in terms of health, education, infrastructure, revenue scope. And once that data was delivered to them, throughout the 5 years, we tried to accompany them. Okay, sir, here are the data. This is what your data is indicating for your municipality. And now this is the time for you to make your choices during your annual budget. But also accompany the community, just informing that why your mayor or deputy mayor is allocating X amount of resources for school infrastructure, where your data, your own data suggests that in that community you don't have enough students. So just accompanying both the sides to hold the public official accountable based on data, gradually, again, I won't claim that there is a massive shift, but there is a shift in the conversation. There are more questions to the public officials as to how those decisions are made and why those decisions are made and who benefits from decisions. So I think it's a service of the think tanks when we produce those research, evidence and analysis. I think it's very important for us to bear in mind who benefits from them and how and when that is appropriate. So there are more examples. So for example, again, for the last 4 years, we have been working with the Kathmandu University to generate data on the public perception towards the public perception on a range of issues, including the trend of the country, perception on public access to local services, and the narrative that we read in Kathmandu Post or Kantipur here in Kathmandu, and the data are quite different. And when we go out at the local level, we get quite different stories. Like, for example, consistently the last 4 years, what the public opinion survey data suggests is a majority of the people at the community level feel that their local government has been responsive to their health and education needs. So I think, again, the key responsibility that I was trying to bring again is we can't just live with one part of the contribution. Perhaps we have to explore other ways so that the knowledge, evidence, and policy recommendations and the discourse and debate that the think tanks would like to contribute is accompanied by other necessary intermediaries.
Right. Dr. Fortune, do you want to add something?
I just want to add a few points there. I think government is the ultimate beneficiary of the work that we do because it is intended to influence the policy making, public policy. And some of the initiatives that we have started on our own, and funding not yet secured, but we think that this is extremely important for the country. So we have taken initiative to work on a number of ideas, and one is this gig workers economy. How can the gig workers economy can really contribute to Nepal? Because especially at times when we are running out of foreign exchange reserves. And without much knowing, it was completely led by private sector, and even at the individual basis, something is already happening in Nepal. I think I heard that tens of thousands of Nepalese are already part of the global digital ecosystem. So they are contributing, they are actually earning money. So IIDS is undertaking a study by trying to collect some funding from private sector itself. And we'd like to just come up with the evidence as to how much of that has really helped Nepal in its foreign external sector. And then I think this will help us in charting out the policy as to what the government can really do to facilitate that process. And there are lots of things like special economic zones. Does it really work in Nepal? I don't think so. So we are also trying to work on that, okay? Because these are very pressing priorities of the country. And we are also advising to the policymakers that we need to transition from labor export to service export. And, unfortunately, what has happened in the last 4 years, and when we used to be in a surplus in trade service, now we have become a deficit in trade and service, And on a wording level, if you take the example of last year's deficit in service, it is worrying, So we need to change that. And for that, studies like this would be extremely important for the government.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Bouchen. I hope that helps. Should we take one more question? Because I think we're running out of time. So, all right. Hi. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sudeep Baju. I'm with BEAT. And my question is, despite being a $32 billion economy, funding from the private sector of philanthropy in Nepal for the think tanks has been very limited. So what do you think is the reason? And how can we look beyond donors for such funding? Thanks.
So philanthropic funding, basically, like how can we encourage that? Because, in the West, mostly, funded, right?
Yeah, I think that's the greatest challenge that we face here for local think tanks, We'd like to diversify the source of funding for our own resources, but the pressing problem is, finding local philanthropic institutions or donors who is willing to help. But surprisingly, just 2 years back, we got one of the largest endowments from a local businessman, no string attached, And with that money, we could do physical transformation of ideas. And now we are into the process of organizational transformation, where we'd like to, take ideas from the tag of NGO to a real think tank. So that is a challenge. We have been a bit innovative. We are trying to tap CSR from the publicly listed companies. We are actually coming to some of the, probably, I don't know if the business executives are here or not, but we are coming out to them because we have some great initiatives, and we'd like to ask them to contribute to this cause. And also we are reaching out to foreign, not the traditional donors that we have, but wealthy individuals and foundations who are not here but who love Nepal, who have a special attachment to Nepal. We are trying to reach out to them for the funding. Yeah.
Right, thank you so much. We have 1 minute in the clock, but I think I'll end it for now. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time and patience. I know we've been here for a very long day. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation, and I hope we were able to create a very relevant discourse for think tanks in Nepal. Right. So thank you so much. Right.
Thank you, Apeksha. Thank you, Vishnu. Thank you, Vishnu.